Hello everybody, my name is Ryan and this is lesson 6 of learning HTML and CSS. In this lesson we'll be learning how to insert CSS into our document. So firstly, what is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS is used as a presentation layer to the website. So we learnt about how HTML is a structural layer of the website, how it puts text on the page, images on the page, tables on the page, and so on. We then learnt about how JavaScript can be the functional layer of the website, where we can make pop-ups and slideshows and so on. And now we introduce CSS, which is the presentational layer of the website. So throughout this course we'll be learning the HTML and CSS aspects of creating a website. Right, so to begin, I've created a web page with a new HTML tag called the h1 tag. This h1 tag stands for heading 1. We'll look more at these tags a little bit later, but you may be familiar with a word processor, and the word processor has the ability to choose the style of the text, and some of the options would be heading 1, heading 2, body text, and so on. And so heading 1 would be a main heading in the document. And then you already know what P is. It's a paragraph. So I've got one main heading and 2 paragraphs. So let's have a look at how this looks in a web browser. So we'll open up our web browser. Press Ctrl O to open the file. And that will be lesson6.html. And there you can see what it looks like. As you can see, it doesn't look particularly attractive. It's Times New Roman font. It's pretty boring. But you can distinctly see, in terms of structure, we have a definite structure in place, which is created by the HTML. We have a main heading and we have 2 paragraphs. So now we get to do something quite exciting, and that is to add a little bit of presentation to this page. Let's maybe change the fonts, change the coloring, maybe the size of the font, and let's switch over now to our code. You can see how we proceed. So there's actually 2 ways of adding CSS, or 3 ways actually, but 2 main ways of adding CSS. The first one I don't like particularly, but many people are using this method, so it's good to be at least familiar with it. So you use a tag called the style tag, which goes in your head section of the document, and we say type is equal to text/CSS. Now you'll remember in our previous lesson we learnt about how to add JavaScript into the document, and I mentioned the different MIME types: main category, subcategory. So text/HTML would refer to a text document that's an HTML type of document. Text/CSS is also text-based, but CSS instead of HTML or JavaScript. Right, so now we'll do our very first rule in CSS. We start with a selector. So we'll say h1, and we use curly brackets. Open our curly brackets, and we close our curly brackets. Now this can be on the same line if you want to, but you'll see as the rules become more complex, it makes more sense to type it over multiple lines like this. So firstly, the selector designates which tag we're going to affect with this rule. So we're saying look throughout the body section of the document. Remember, the body section is the visible part of the document. Look throughout the body section for any h1 tag and apply the rules in between the curly brackets to that h1 tag. So first of all, I'm going to change the color. So inside the curly brackets, I'm going to say color, and I'll make it red. Okay, so 2 things to note. Firstly, the word color is spelt with the American spelling, COLOR. Also note the presence of the colon. So this is basically the property that we're setting, it's the color. And then the value that we're setting it to appears after the colon. And the semicolon is used to separate rules. So what we can do is add an additional rule. We could say, for example, font-family Arial. Okay, so to summarize, selector, what are we selecting? We're selecting the H1 tag. What are we going to do to this H1 tag? We're going to change the color to red, and we're going to change the font to Arial. So the font setting is always done by using font-family, one word. And remember, the semicolon is used to separate the different properties. So there's one property, there's another property. And I can add additional properties underneath this if I so desire. Right, let's have a look at what happens when I hit refresh. There you can see the heading has changed to red, and also the font has changed to Arial. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing to the paragraphs. I want to change maybe the color to green, and let's use Tahoma as the font family. So I make a separate rule now because it's a new selector. I'm selecting a new tag, also with curly brackets. So I'm saying P for paragraph, and it's going to apply to both paragraphs. In fact, if I had 100 paragraphs on the page, this set of rules would apply to all 100 paragraphs on the page. Okay, so we'll change the color to green, and we'll change the font family to Tahoma. Okay, and there's many other things we could do to the text, many other properties we could set. As we go through the course, we'll learn about all the different properties. For example, the size of the font, and so on. So this is the first method to add CSS into your document. The reason why I don't like it so much is because CSS is almost a separate layer to creating a website. We spoke about the structural layer being HTML, the functional layer being JavaScript, and now the presentation layer being CSS. So the best thing to do is to actually put the CSS into a separate file, seeing that it is a separate layer. So we'll create a new document, and we'll copy the CSS rules, or cut the CSS rules from the HTML and paste it into the new document. So the only thing in this document is CSS. Save the file, and we'll save it as lesson6.css. So note the file extension, CSS for cascading style sheets. So HTML would be the structural layer, JS would be the functional layer, that's the JavaScript, and the CSS is the presentation layer. And we save. And also note how the editor color coded everything according to CSS. Now that it knows it's CSS because of the file extension, it's able to correctly color code the CSS. Next thing we have to change is we have to get rid of the style tags completely. So obviously now if I save this and go back to the browser, all the CSS rules have been removed, so therefore I get everything as it was before we applied any presentation. But now we have a new tag called the link tag. And the link tag is used to link an external document to this file. So we can say, first of all, the type of document would be text/CSS. So that remains the same as before. And then we type rel for relationship. That's another attribute. What is the relationship to the document? It's a style sheet. And then href is another attribute you can use. Href is very similar to the SRC attribute we looked at in the previous lesson, the source attribute. So href stands for hyperlink reference, and it's a way of referring to an external file. So we're going to tell it to look for lesson6.css. Remember, that's the external file. Also note that the link tag does not have closing tag. It's just one tag, just like the meta tag, no closing tag. And once again, all the CSS rules have been implemented. The advantage being that they are read from an external file called lesson6.css. The reason why it is an advantage is, number one, it removes the clutter from this page. So all we'll end up with in this file is pure HTML, pure structure. And then we have the presentation layer in a completely separate file. We have, if there is any JavaScript, we'd have that in a completely separate file. So all the layers are separated. And this is the way the web industry is moving in terms of standardizing. The standard has been to separate those three layers as much as possible into separate files. The other advantage of having your CSS in a separate file is that you could then apply it to multiple subpages without rewriting all of those rules. Because if you think about it logically, your website's going to consist of multiple pages. It will have a home page, it will have a contact page, maybe a products page, and so on. And generally you would want the same look and feel across all of those pages. So what we often do is we would have a separate HTML file for every separate physical subpage, but then maybe one CSS file, maybe one or two, maybe one CSS file for the general look and feel of the entire site. So then all we would do is copy and paste this link tag into every single one of the subpages in the head section. And then the look and feel is controlled by one central file for the whole website. So if I ever do want to change the look and feel of the website without changing the structure or the content of the site, all I have to do is edit this file and the entire look and feel of the site could change. And so ends our lesson in adding CSS to our HTML document.